welcome back, everybody. Mike, do you want to introduce?
Absolutely. So today we have a study session, a school resource officer update presented by our Executive Director of Security, Levon Smart.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Good.
Today, we're going to talk about school resource officer. This has been, I would say, a long time coming. I've been here, I guess, a year and a few months, and we've been talking about it 2 weeks since I've been here. So without further ado, the school resource officer program. Today, we're going to talk about, we'll start with the objectives, the stakeholder input and concerns, best practices, program analysis, purpose of the school resource officer, the conclusions, and my recommendation, and then any questions that you may have. As we started looking at this program about a year and a half ago, what we started noticing that there was a lot of concerns on both sides, benefits for and those benefits and concerns. The benefits were teachers, staff, parents thinking about the targeted violence. So when we think about that targeted violence, that active shooter, that active assailant piece, also some staff had concerns, that feeling of safety, that they believed that the school resource officer provided as well. First responder partnerships. I know the former superintendent, Dr. Lyon, she was really big on that emergency preparedness and having that partnership between us and those outside entities. Officers that were familiar with the schools should something happen. Liaison with the juvenile justice system and that emergency preparedness piece. And rightfully so, on the other side, we had those that had their own concerns. We had those parents and some students and different community members that had concerns of the school to prison pipeline, the lack of training that the officers had, and how they were actually interacting with the kids on each campus, the money it costs, of course, the use of force, whether they were being trained correctly on how to actually operate within those schools, which goes back to the training, them also being used as a discipline tool. Right, being used as a heavy or that discipline tool for school level violations, not criminal level violations. And then just their sheer presence, how it scared officers, or how it scared students, sorry. So armed with that information and input from the board, we did a survey. And the survey went out about February 12th and ran to April 1st or 2nd, I do believe. And that main question was, what are your thoughts regarding the role of the school resource officers in Palm Springs Unified School District? We had 673 participants, 559 were staff members, 95 were parents, guardians, or family members, 15 were students. 613 total left thoughts that they provided us with thoughts. I know I've talked to people on both sides of that. I've had those that are for that says, well, where are the representation of those who want SROs? And then I've talked to those who are against, who says, well, we weren't fairly represented in this as well. And what I say to that is, honestly, before that, I didn't have 15 students input. I didn't have 95 parents input, and I did not have 559 staff members input. So to me, just on its face, for its merits, it gave me information I didn't have, whether it was 500, almost 700, or 5,000. I didn't have any of that information, so it helped me. It doesn't diminish the fact that I understand on both sides that there are still those concerns, but it did give me information I did not have when this thing started. As we see, and I don't have my glasses on me, these are some of the answers for and in the middle of the road and then against. So as I look through, and I'm going to cherry pick a few only because it's going to relay and roll right into this entire topic as we get through it. If we look at the third one down, it starts with, I believe school resource officers are essential to a school culture and climate. They are important as they help students see there are consequences to their actions. They help support teachers when students are disruptive. That answer in and of itself would lead those that are concerned that, again, as we spoke earlier, they're being used as a punitive tool. So that means internally we need to have some training. Okay, that's something we have to own, and that's okay. So then,
Levon, can
Yes.
you also then just explain what the stars mean? So I'm looking at that comment, and it says it's like a blue star with 5.0 and then a green star that says 1.5.
This, and I will be the first one to tell you, I am not completely versed on the thought exchange and the star information. Sorry about that. That's my apologies.
It correlates to the blue circle and the green circle?
Yeah, so each participant has an opportunity to rank each response, and so this is just saying that the respondents who rated this thought rated it highly in terms of being a very positive, a positive outcome of having school resource officers. Whereas if the green star was the larger number, then that means they rated that thought as a reason why it was not a good use for us to use the school resource officers.
Thank you, and again, I apologize. If we go to the middle, you see the one that states all school resource officers should have crisis prevention training. That's actually a great thing because we have started that, as well as our security officers, because that's that SEL component, that social emotional component that we need to also be thinking about. Then if we go to side B, the very first one says, time to use the resources better. Students need to be given tools to succeed, not be villainized by the system. And a resource officer creates the perception of prison, not pupils. So I ask then the resource officer, based on what training they currently have, is making someone feel that way. So we go back to that training component. So you start to see that we have training inside and training outside in order to get this thing going in the right direction. It's not a zero-sum game. It takes all of us, right? This all comes back to our school community, inside, everybody being trained, knowing exactly what we're doing with that resource. So as we move on to the next slide with the thought exchange, this now tells you what were the big components. The biggest components were, of course, safety, then role definition, relation. Those were all important measures to everyone, but it came back to school safety. So with that information and collecting that survey data, what I did is I wanted to weigh our program versus the best practices that are out there. Now, I've been talking about this program for over a year now, and the biggest thing is I've been talking about it. I wanted everybody to see that there's nothing up there that says Levon Smart. So this is not my opinion. These are national and international organizations that are developing and watching and guiding best practices for this particular program. So all I'm saying is let's look at the best practices and then weigh our program against the best practices. With that being said, the best practices that were noted out of these programs, out of these entities: partnership, MOU or agreements, collaborative process, training relevant and specific to the school resource officer. If we start with the Department of Education, right there, first one, create a sustainable relationship. That's the biggest thing, and formalize an MOU with your law enforcement agencies and your school districts. When I say sustainable, I think that's the biggest word there, is sustainable. So if I win the lottery tonight and I leave, we have a relationship that's not predicated on myself or anybody else. If a new chief comes in and he retires over at Cathedral City, we have that MOU and we have a relationship and a partnership. So these things will continue to move forward. We want Department of Ed also suggests draft and publish hiring guidelines with input from the law agency and the school community stakeholders. Develop ongoing training programs for the school resource officer. That is something that we're doing internally because we want to keep our security officers at a level proficient that meets the needs of all of our students. And a continuous evaluation of the SRO program. Everything year to year, just like we do with any academic program, we should be looking at that year to year, evaluating what works and what does not work. The U.S. Department of Justice, the Community Oriented Policing Service, this is what they say. Develop that MOU. Again, that's one of those four categories. Let's get that MOU to make sure we're doing things right. Next, train all funding that the Department of Justice provides for has to be done on the national standard of the National Association of School Resource Officers. So even if we decided to get a COPS grant that would pay for our SROs, guess what? They're still going to have to go be trained by the national organization that the Department of Justice sees and says this is the standard in which we accept for the money we're giving you. Security and safety assessments of the learning environment. So they want to go another step and say, hey, do your safety and security assessments, all those pieces together, and then determine what your environment looks like and whether you need an SRO or if the SRO is meeting the need for you within there. So then if you look at that continuous evaluation process, that doubles back to the Department of Ed where they talked about their secure program. National Association of School Resource Officers. They established an MOU. You'll start to see there's those common themes that are there. The selection process, that's a huge one. Us having part in the selection process will determine the right fit, right? We don't necessarily always talk about that, but there is a right fit no matter what we do in life, be it our spouse or job or an employee that we're picking. We want to look for the right fit. School SRO should be specifically trained in school SRO things. They use the triad, National Association of School Resource Officers. They use the triad. And that triad is a law enforcement officer, a law counselor, informal law counselor, and a law educator. They wind up being an advocate for the juvenile justice system. But if you look, and there's two that I really want to point out to you. Trauma-informed practices. They know that this is a big thing in the school, the educational system. So that PBIS, all those things, MTSS, all these educational pieces, NASRO understands that, and that's why they also want officers to get trained and then also get that school-based training as well. They also feel that strong collaboration, again, between the school community and the police departments is what actually grows a system. And then finally, we have the International Association of Chiefs of Police. Again, you'll see that common theme, scope of work, goals, the parameters of the partnership, the interagency agreements, the assignments and collaborate, the assignments of the SRO, collaboration of the officers, the educators. Again, that's that partnership and us having say in that selection. But my biggest one, again, these right here says SROs should receive specialized training. Those are police officers, police chiefs saying SROs should receive specific training to SROs. So these are police policing themselves as well. And based on this information, I conducted an internal analysis of our current program. And if we talk over our program right now, and we look at those 4 categories, we start with partnership. Right now, we are actively engaged in maintaining law enforcement relationships, but they're not great, so we're rebuilding them. Yeah, right? So when I came in, I didn't know what I was coming into. I didn't know what they looked like, and that's okay. But talking, we've had, I believe Chief Crum had just come back from to Cathedral City from a retirement. Then we're getting ready to have movement again at Palm Springs. So it's things like that. We've had turnover with Riverside. So these relationships had pretty much kind of withered away, but we're bringing them back. And the beauty of all this is now we're at the table and we're talking. So if nothing else, we now have communication that we didn't have before. MOU. As I dug in, we have 2 different MOUs. Riverside County, and I'm kind of jumping ahead to collaboration as well because it'll be an inconsistent scope of work. Riverside County has their own, and theirs talks about the triad. It doesn't say it specifically, but it talks about law educator, law enforcement officer, law counselor. So those things are in there. So at least they have some sort of idea of what it is they want to do, what the SRO should be doing. Where the generic one that we use for the other 3 agencies, which would be Desert Hot Springs, Cathedral City, and Palm Springs, just says SRO services. And it's just in quotes, services, which leads a lot of ambiguity and could lead to things happening to both student or officer. And that's not where we want to be. We want it lined out so we know, no, they're not a disciplinarian. That's where we go back to that MOU and that agreement piece. If we looked at the collaboration part, we don't have that, right? So that's kind of the 2 are together. We have a really inconsistent scope of work on both of those agreements because there was no collaborative effort putting it together. Riverside said, hey, we're going to do this. And the other one was a general one, and we said we're going to do that. Sorry. Matter of fact, in the Riverside one, there's a statement in there that I would take out because I saw it. I noticed it. It said, maintain order on campus. Well, to me, when I hear that, if Timmy's walking around with a hat on and he shouldn't have it on, then that's maintaining order. No, let's take that out. Let's get rid of all the ambiguity so we know exactly what we're speaking of and we're being specific about what we're asking of this resource. Then if we look at training, hodgepodge, not really there because we've never sent them to any training such as NASRO or we haven't seen any training from them that said they've gone to such a thing. Even if they go train, we don't know it. We haven't seen certificates. We have nothing to say that they've had any sort of training specific to that of our SRO. Now, I can say this because since I've been here, we have had them train in youth mental health first aid, restorative practices, crisis intervention team training, and also 504s and IEPs. We are Palm Springs Unified School District. Our job is educating students. That is what we do. We don't do security. We do not do police work. It is those two entities' job. My job as a director of my department is to facilitate that educational process. And we do that by understanding what the educational process entails. And it entails these things. So the current reality, looking at this over these 4 categories, gives us a police officer that's assigned to our buildings. It does not give us a school resource officer. The purpose of a school resource officer is to assist the school administration in maintaining a safe and secure educational environment. And I'll go right back to there because it says educational environment. And we are Palm Springs Unified School District. Education is what we do. So we have to be looking at it from that lens and not the lens of a police officer, so to speak. So that triad again, SRO responsibilities, law enforcement officer, law-related counselor, law-related educator. I give you these because I've said these 3 different pieces before, but I wanted to give you some examples so you could kind of see where the rubber meets the road. So when we talk law enforcement officer, these are things we know. Emergency responder liaison. Because I'll tell you right now, a school resource officer can be just as effective should it be an active assailant as they could be in an earthquake or a fire or a sick case. Okay, so they can still provide us something. It doesn't have to be they're hanging their hat on one thing. So they can be that emergency responder liaison to all those agencies that help us. Emergency preparedness. They can help us with those safe school plans, finding out what the right things are, connecting us with those other entities outside of the school district so we can get that help, that additional help we may need. Special event planning, graduation and other events, football games. Enforce law violations. When we do have drugs or guns, violence, those things that can occur on a school campus, those are things that you would normally call a policeman in for, so that would not be foreign from what we would say there. Violent critical incident response, and I use that covers that raging fire, that active assailant, that earthquake, that 7.0 earthquake, that covers that. Then we look at the law-related counselor. And if you look at the picture is a great indicator of what goes on. Somebody who's just forming a rapport with kids as they move throughout their day, who that kid at some point in time, should they need, they can go talk to. As much as we would like to believe, kids are not all going to the counselor to talk. They may go to a teacher. They may go to a custodian. They may go to an assistant principal. But whoever our kids can get the information they need to them or from them, those are the people that we need around. And if they're a resource in kids and they're making relationships and kid connections, then that's okay. Because long as our kids have a place to go to say the things they need to say and get the information back they need, that's what we want. We're trying to build a whole kid because it's a whole community. Refer students to social services or legal aid. For example, I know when I was a young kid, I made a dumb decision to drive through a red light and got hit. But I didn't know how to navigate that process. But we did have a school resource officer who wasn't a bad guy, so I asked him, I got a ticket, what am I looking at? What does this look like? Who kind of helped me walk through the whole thing. And that's that, so those are informal things. That's that informal counseling piece. And I've said it before above, providing just attentive ear for whatever's on the student's mind. That's really what that is. And working with the counselors, knowing, saying, hey, I don't know if you know it, kid A is having an issue today, you might want to reach out to him. Having that connection as well. And then law-related educator. The picture there, they're actually sitting in a car that has a screen in front, and they're going over texting and driving. And based on the interactions between the phone and the TV will determine what happens for the gentleman in the car. But those things, bullying, cyberbullying, dating violence, gang violence. Right now, we've got some things that are starting to crop up again. Having that information there helps everyone, helps the kids, helps us. Then we look at driving safety, underage drinking and driving, internet safety and substance abuse. These are all things that they deal with on a daily basis, but they can also help our students with and kind of try to navigate. And if they're excelling in these 3 areas, then that's when we truly get a school resource officer. However, our current school resource officer program needs improvement. After seeing all of it and weighing it again, I understand everything full across the board, but having seen ours the way it currently is fielded, we're deficient in those 4 categories. It needs improvement. The partnership, as we've talked about, still working on it. The agreements, the collaboration, the training. Consequently, our program is not working at its full capacity. Okay, and our resource officers are looked at as a punitive tool versus a wraparound support. And a wraparound support is any support as a school we can give a kid, give a student to grow that student. Be it a security officer on a campus, be it a football coach. A football coach can be a wraparound support. School resource officer can be a wraparound support as well, because it's a school community wrapping around that student to give that student what they need.
LeVon, can
Yes,
I
sir.
ask a quick question?
Yes, sir.
And I don't purport to understand all of the opposition to SROs, you know, the entire argument one way or the other. So if it's an ignorant question, just tell me, sit down. But some of the critique or some of the criticism I hear is that the SROs are doing, much like the same criticism of police departments, that they do things that are not really what they're trained for. So best example that I have is things like mental health crisis, right? Which sometimes presents itself as a violent incident, right? As somebody's in a fight or in an argument or acting in a way that it would present itself as being violent. And do we have a plan, or do we have a way of training our folks so that they're staying out of those incidents and the right counselor is being inserted there? And knowing how to triage that, right? You know, so that we address sort of that community concern about, are our people doing the right things that they're supposed to be doing? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And it is not a bad question at all, and I like it because it hits on something that I said earlier. So crisis intervention team training is about dealing with people in mental health crisis. So throughout the U.S., it is a movement amongst police, and I've been in this line of work for almost 27 years, and it's been a movement for at least 20. So we have started here with our own staff, sending them to school to be trained in it. It's a 2-day course. We've sent all of the SROs as well, so they can see those mental health issues if they manifest themselves and exactly how to deal with them. They get a chance to sit in a room, and consumers come in. Consumers are those who use the mental health services. So consumers come in and tell them their stories. We have today with us 2 supervisors, the 2 new supervisors, Alex Borrego and Nick Capelli, and both of them have gone to the training. And Alex himself loved it because it was something new he didn't know. He's like, I never knew to look at mental illness that way. I didn't know it could manifest itself this way. So yes, we are doing that, and that is something we need because, again, we go back to that SEL component. We are a school or educational system. Our job, my job, the SRO's job, their job is to facilitate the educational process, and we can only do it with those things. If we do it right, we start looking at this, this is what it starts looking like, where we have SROs that are part of our community. They're understanding our kids. They understand the needs of our kids. They understand us, the ebb and flow, and they're out and they're doing the things that are helping grow all of our students. Finally, my recommendation, we really need to rebuild the school resource officer program on current practices and current guidelines and best practices. We can restore it without a doubt. It may take a year. I can't give you a timeline on how long it would take, but it could take up to a year. If we can't find any headway, we got to determine our best alternatives, because there was some person greater than I who says, if you take something away, you got to put something back. So what does that look like? So we have to look at those things when we move forward as well. I wish it was a very clean way to do things, but it's not. It really isn't. There's going to be people on both sides that feel like they win or lose. But at the end of the day, this is about our kids, and I wanted to make sure I gave you the information that was just the ground truth without any, bias on my part. I just wanted to give you the ground truth of where we truly stand. Any questions?
I have a question. Levon,
Yes,
can you
sir.
contrast the duties of an SRO officer with a security officer?
So what we don't want to do is we don't want to assume the capabilities are the same. The easiest way I can explain it is this. You're going to look at a law enforcement officer who's probably going to be about 12 months into training before they're set out on their own, okay? So we're looking at a very robust training style, and to maintain their license, they're going to have to do these things yearly, okay? That's not the same with our staff. Our staff are coming from a different point of view, but we're building them up. We know that we need to build them up as well. So those officers are going to have training that our safety officers do not. That's going to be your biggest thing that you see there. Now, the other piece will be this. Can our officers be law educators and law counselors? They can probably be, I would say, educators and counselors, but they don't know the law like the school resource officer will. And then when it comes to those law enforcement capacity, of course, you're looking at a law enforcement officer who does have the backing of the U.S. Constitution, the Constitution of the State of California, and the laws of the city of Palm Springs or wherever they may reside. So those are other things. Those are the biggest differences between the two. It's going to be that training level and what they can bring based on law. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I haven't like that between comments and question. Another concern that I have when we have the SRO assigned to one specific school, have the proper training in the future to deal with students. But what happens is that officer have to leave, have vacation, is sick, and they had to send another officer. I think I don't know how the cities will deal with that, to have a spare officer to replace that. And I had also, and not comparison, but I participated before in the homeless count, for example, in the county. And I was with one group that have social worker, mental health specialists, and we deal very well with those homeless, asking questions to try to help them. Another group include police officers in the group. The police went with the homeless, technically arrest the homeless, they put it in the floor, they check everything, They have different kind of training. That is my concern, not to use police officer in the schools. And I think it's better to look for different ways, and I think we have good group, the school security. They have good prestige with the students. They feel very comfortable with them, and that is my concern. And it's proper to have the SRO in the school dealing with minors people, students.
To answer your first question, I'm not a big proponent of somebody who's not a school resource officer trained as that being in the building. No. So if Officer A happens to be sick today. I would prefer Officer A be sick today, and we cover down versus bringing that person you just described dealing with the homeless into our building. And the biggest thing, again, it's a school resource officer. If they're not trained in those specific things, so what you're asking is that they're specifically trained to be able to deal with that juvenile factor. And that's what we want. If we don't get that, then no, that's not good for anybody. We want people who understand and want to be around juveniles, understand that the juvenile's mind is still progressing. That kids are going to do, for lack of a better term, what I always say, kids are going to do dumb. So we should already expect that. So when they do it, it's not a surprise. Now, some will surprise you based on the level of ingenuity, but it should not be a surprise. And that's why we want school resource officers who understand this and they're trained in that aspect. Does that answer both your questions, sir?
Levon, my first thought is really a comment.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for facilitating education and helping students succeed with academics.
Thank
you. And I understand that's your core principle, and I really appreciate that statement. Kind of logistics, you talked about the 4 components of the program analysis. The partnership, I'm just curious. There's Cathedral City PD, Desert Hot Springs PD, Palm Springs PD, and the sheriff's office. Right now, how is it? How often do you get to meet, or how does it work? I'm
if
just
I may,
curious.
that is a great question, because I guess somebody I work with says sometimes you have to blow things up in order to get people to pay attention. So over the last week, we've kind of blown things up. Last week, I attended the Chiefs meeting. I believe it's the Coachella Valley Chiefs and Sheriffs, so they were all there. And I can't say that everybody liked me. When I stood up, I knew there were going to be some that didn't like me. They thought, we're defunding the police. This is what we're going on. But at the end of the day, we're an educational institution. This is what we're going to do. This is what we need to do. So they understood that. But it is a challenge. That was the first time I actually got to meet them because of COVID. So I've talked to everybody on phones and send emails, but that was the first time I got to get in front of them. And I love Chief Henson from Desert Hot Springs and Chief Crum. They were sitting next to each other. And he says, well, why can't we do more of this? Well, we can. It was just COVID was stopping us from doing it before. And COVID was the thing that we were dealing with. So we're right now starting to move, hopefully, out of COVID into a space that's more akin to me, right? And getting a chance to sit down and hash these things out. Because the biggest thing that I know, regardless of whether you sit for or against, I know the one commonality between the two is that everybody wants to do what's right for kids. It's just, we're just seeing it through a different lens.
I guess the second part, thank you for that, is the MOU agreements.
Yes, ma'am.
Maybe I missed this, but in the hiring process, you're talking about making that match. Does the district get a good share of time in the hiring process? How does that work?
So, and I'm glad you bring that up. So today in the 11th hour, as I'm speaking with, and it'll show you how disjointed our scope of work or our MOUs are. Chief Henson, speaking with him, he says, hey, Levon, it's going to look different for us this year because we need to bring somebody else new in. Other person's gone. Okay. He says, but what we do is we post a job and you guys have part in this. I said, well, Chief, I didn't know that. Right. So as we're digging down, all these communications are now opening up. But that was one of the things I brought up to every chief, said, hey, look, you guys, if you have 5 people that put in for the job, we ask that you send those 5 to us. If you're okay with those 5, at least let us have a seat at the table to say, I would prefer to do it apart from them. Because at least if we go, yeah, that person's great, and they're like, no. I want them to have their true assessment of their own employee prior to them getting to us, and then we help them pick from there. That's an easy way to do it, and that wasn't one of those things that anybody really pushed back on. But Chief Henson currently says we do it, so we have different things going on with different departments. But because we have these kind of disjointed agreements, and there's no partnership or collaboration, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. Literally 2 hours before this meeting, as I'm talking to people, I'm learning new things that were not on the table before.
couple more. This first one's more of a comment.
Yes, sir.
I know you have more information today than you did prior to the thought exchange study, but that's one of my concerns with the thought exchange studies. We did one, we did one for the calendar year, and they're always faculty heavy. And so I don't know if we're really getting a true picture of what the community wants with these thought exchange studies. My second comment is, I really respect your opinion, and if I'm hearing you right, you see a real value for school resource officers. But the way I'm looking at it right now is that we have one at each high school, and we spend, I don't know, about $400,000 or so for that. And I don't see anything, except for the law enforcement duty, I don't see anything that if we take that $400,000 and build more capacity in our own security officers, why we wouldn't be better off. Now, we'd still obviously have to have the relationships with everybody. They'd be different relationships. You know, they wouldn't have the presence on campus. But the way I'm looking at it right now, that might be something to consider.
And that would go with number 2, right? My second recommendation. If we can't come to a consensus, be it us, be it the police department, that we look to determine our next best alternative. Regardless whether we do or don't, the group, as I see it, we're building them up. We're going to be building them up. We've got those things that we're putting in the pipeline, so we want to have more training. We want to scaffold it, so to speak, so we can get those officers up to that level, build that capacity within them, regardless whether we have police officers, school resource officers or not. It's just something we should be doing.
What we have to do board members to give one direction today, or to
That I
go
will-
by
I
your
will defer.
recommendation?
I will defer.
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you recall with the LCAP, what we did is we did set aside the approximately $400,000, but said to the board that we would not enter into any contracts with that money until Levon had an opportunity to do this presentation. In this presentation, our recommendation is that we not immediately move forward with those contracts, that Levon continue to work to explore whether or not we're able to create that triad and get that relationship with each agency and have the right training and the right staffing. And again, for the amount of money, because we also did reduce the funding by about 50% from last year. And as he said, that might take this whole school year to do. In the meantime, he's going to continue to build the security team here at the district, and we will certainly give the board updates along the way. But our recommendation now is for Levon to continue working on it, but we're not close to entering into any contracts with school resource officers for this year.
And so do you have a set of metrics that will determine whether one is successful?
Could you be more specific when you say one? Do you mean the
Your
officers?
recommendation one
Oh, one.
versus
So
recommendation two.
the biggest thing is this: it's sitting down in that collaborative effort. Like I said, it could take 3 weeks, but I know that if we're looking at that recommendation, the chiefs, they're there, they're ready, they want to work, they want to work with us. The relationship just was never there, okay? And this is kind of everything came to a head, and COVID didn't help much, and now this is where we are. But again, like I said, everybody wants to be in the game and supply that resource. It's just sitting down, going through those things, making sure they meet the metrics of those 4 entities, not Levon, but meets the metrics of those 4 entities, and then saying, okay, we're good to go. One of the biggest pieces is going to be training the officers. Because those trainings don't happen just tomorrow. They may happen 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now. And it's a 40-hour class. It's a week-long class. I'll be sending some of our officers to it as well. But that's probably going to be maybe the biggest one. The other things are really I think, easier to get to, that agreement and that MOU, because it's fine-tuning words and on paper.
Right.
The other part is where you might have the friction.
Yeah, and I get that. I mean, obviously, having a relationship with the departments, you can measure that, right? Having an MOU, you can, yes or no, you do or you don't. But there has to be more to it than that. You have to feel like the people are actually living up to those agreements.
Yes.
That our staff is properly trained and is implementing that training. Is there a I know you said it could take more than a year, but can we look at it in terms of milestones along the path that say we're making adequate progress or we're not? It's time to reconsider at X point, Y point, Z point.
I would say in order to have that, the program in and of itself would have to run a full year. So then during those milestones, because it's going to be not just, I wish it was just predicated on that one school resource officer.
Sure.
But we have all those other people, all those other variables such as counselors and principals and how our people use them or how they're not being used. So I can't give you a clear-cut answer on that piece. But the one thing we can start to measure are those kid interactions, right? So if we start looking and going to the high schools, because high school kids will talk to us, hey, how do you feel about this? Now we can start really nailing this down because we've said, hey, here's the program. This is what the program should be doing. We know you should be doing those kid connections. These are things such as drunk driving schools that they were putting on. Hey, this is what it looks like if you have the drunk goggles on. We can start to measure those things. And if they say, well, yeah, no, yes, no, maybe, that's where we start getting that feedback. So that feedback, that qualitative feedback can really help us more. I wish it was